All right, let's get to our program. Today's host and moderator is J. Michael Sawyers. Mike is a geotechnical principal at ECS. Mike brings 34 years of diverse experience to ECS, including work providing an array of services across a variety of market sectors. Mike couples his more recent experience managing multidisciplinary engineering teams with his ability to drill down into the geosciences to provide a unique consulting perspective. Mike's specialty areas include sustainable development, ground improvement, soil management, and situ testing, and chemical drying and stabilization of soils. Mike holds an engineering degree from Virginia Tech and the University of Maryland. Mike, as I mentioned earlier, is immediate past president of the Committee for Goals and currently serves on the board of directors. Please welcome Mike to the podium.
Great job on my bio. I'm not sure I could get through it without making a mistake. Nice job. Anyway, thank you, Scott. I'm delighted to be here this morning, and I'm looking forward to hearing from our speaker and the panelists. ECS is a proud member of the Committee for Dulles, and we are pleased to be a sponsor of today's breakfast. I'm really pleased at the turnout. This is outstanding. We actually have a sellout crowd, so give yourselves a round of applause for that. I've been associated with the Committee for Dulles for about 5 years now, and I want to invite you, if you're not members, to consider joining. You can check out the website, committeefordulles.org, or you can talk to our Executive Director, Scott York, about a membership. And you'll see in these slides, I believe, actually up here on the dais, our kind of slogan, connected, involved, effective. Those 3 words in a nutshell describe this organization. They are connected to businesses inside the airport fence, outside MWAA itself, and are involved in activities on behalf of the Metropolitan Washington Airports Authority and other businesses, both inside and outside the fence. And they're effective. The individuals that put their time and sweat equity into this organization have made true change in our region for the many years this organization has been involved. So please, I invite you to talk to Scott about joining. So why are we here today? When I first came up with the concept of a sustainable infrastructure discussion, or at the time it was a webinar 4 years ago, there was already talk about this project that was going to happen at Dulles Airport. Well, in 2020, the Metropolitan Washington Airports Authority, MWAA, published its sustainability report, and that caught a lot of attention. And it's not just lip service. We'll get into some of the details about it during our panel discussion, I'm sure. But one of the major projects that has been in the works for many years now is this 100 megawatt solar array and 50 megawatt battery storage project in partnership with Dominion Energy. This project, once completed, will be the largest renewable energy project ever developed at a U.S. airport. It's kind of a big deal. So we're happy to have our keynote speaker here today with us. I'll introduce him in just a moment. Todd Flowers is the Director of Business Development at Dominion Energy. He is responsible for leading the regulated power generation business development team, which includes the development of acquisition of power generation projects, such as utility scale and distributed solar facilities, and new nuclear power generation, including small modular reactors. The team also acquires projects from third parties and manages the company's clean energy filings with the state's utility commission, with a company commitment to provide clean, reliable, and affordable electricity, his team has a primary focus on the development of clean energy, of clean, reliable, and affordable electricity. A primary focus on the development of clean energy technologies. Todd holds a Bachelor of Science degree in physics from Longwood University, a master's degree in nuclear engineering from the University of Virginia, and a master's degree in business administration from Virginia Commonwealth University. Please give a warm welcome to Todd Flowers.
I appreciate it, Mike, and thank you all for having me this morning. I was truly amazed when I drove in last night and I was driving up toward Dulles, because it's been a few years since I've driven at night, that kind of corridor, and just the amount of economic development in this area is tremendous. The beautiful Google building all lit up kind of felt like I was in a futuristic movie. It's amazing how much this area has grown in the last decade. When I started at Dominion Energy 26 years ago in nuclear engineering, I never envisioned that I'd now be leading a team that's responsible for developing and acquiring something so critical to national security, to our infrastructure. Leading a team that's building and bringing online new power stations is an honor and a privilege and an exciting time. We're sitting in a part of the United States that has the highest electrical load growth rate of any other part of the country. Primarily driven by data centers that y'all are all very well aware of, but those data centers provide really the economic backbone to everything we do, whether it's getting directions while you're driving in, whether you're on the Zoom call, whether you're checking the stock online for something you want to buy at Home Depot. But the data centers are critical energy infrastructure, a primary driver to our very large electrical load demands. But that's not it. We're also electrifying the Commonwealth. People are transitioning to electric vehicles. In rural Virginia, where people are relying on propane and fossil fuel to heat their homes, they're transitioning to heat pumps. So electrification is happening all across the Commonwealth. Today, I'm going to spend a few minutes providing just some general background on our broader power generation initiatives, and then I'll focus a little bit more on the Dulles Solar Plus Storage project, including the very innovative in-kind consideration that is a partnership we have with the Metropolitan Washington Airports Authority, helping them enable an electrification of their facility. I think most of you are very likely familiar with Dominion Energy Virginia, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time giving a background of our company. But this is our distribution and transmission footprint. We also own power generation facilities really all across the Commonwealth. 2.6 million customers, continuing to deliver cleaner and cleaner energy, even with the ever-growing electrical demands. And we're continuing to provide that energy at rates that are well below the national average. In Loudoun and Fairfax counties, we're also a big player. We have over 500,000 customers in those two counties alone. Over 600 employees call these counties the place they do business, where they work, where they play, where they raise their families. We also contribute significant economic benefits to the localities through taxes and through equipment that we procure from local vendors. As Mike alluded to, my role in the company is to develop new power generation facilities across our footprint and across technologies. We also spend a great deal of time working with a team called Strategic Planning, and it's that team that develops a 15-year and 25-year view of what do we need to build in the next decade to 2 decades to ensure that we can continue delivering reliable electricity. So we have a future look. We work with PJM and other stakeholders to determine what would those electrical load needs be, and then put plans in place to ensure that we'll have those power generation facilities online when they're needed. So we work closely with strategic planning. We work closely with our policy team to ensure that both state and federal legislation supports our needs to ensure that we can continue to deliver electricity. And then we work really closely with the State Corporation Commission. All the projects that I work on ultimately need to go to our regulator for their review and approval to ensure that what we're building and what we're investing in is in our customer's best interest. And then lastly, where a pen is put to paper is in developing and acquiring new power generation facilities. That includes wind, both onshore and offshore. There are some challenges with onshore wind. Offshore wind is a different story. We have the largest offshore wind project in the country under construction today. And then energy storage, critically important. Energy storage allows us to pull energy from the grid when the load demands may not be very high, and then store that energy. And then when you get home at night, between the hours of 5 and 6, we can then release that energy into the grid and serve it as a reserve for power. So energy storage in a lot of ways serves as an enabler of our investment in more renewable energy. And as I'll get to in a couple of minutes, we're looking at new innovative types of energy storage. Solar, we have the second largest solar fleet of any power company in the United States. And we're continuing to invest in distributed solar. Those projects are more challenging, typically more expensive on a per kilowatt basis. We see value in having distributed energy sources throughout our system. So we're looking at things like putting solar on rooftops, on landfills, on other brownfield sites. And then nuclear, which has been the backbone of our system for over half a century. Our Surrey Nuclear Power Station hit its 50th birthday a couple of years ago. Surrey and Northona both received their subsequent license renewal from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, authorizing them to operate for 80 years. These systems produce about 40% of our capacity and over 90% of our clean energy. So nuclear is certainly the backbone of our carbon-free power generation. And then natural gas. I know that's not a popular topic with a lot of folks, but we need natural gas if we want to have reliability. In particular, those times of severe weather events. I don't know if y'all remember Winter Storm Elliott, but the peak of that storm happened on Christmas Eve. It was December 24th, 2022. And between the hours of 7 and 8 a.m., the company hit an all-time customer load peak in the history of the company. We had every power source at our fingertips operating at capacity to meet that very significant customer load demand. And if you recall, there were a couple of days of below freezing temperatures where it never got above freezing for several days. And it's those moments it's increasingly difficult to heat your home. So for those people that have heat pumps, the emergency heat turned on. And when that happens, it's essentially an electric coil that consumes a lot of electricity. But people needed that emergency heat in order to heat their homes. Our utilities to the south, a lot of them had rolling blackouts. We were lucky, we did not have rolling blackouts. But it was a signal that during these very severe weather events, you need to have dispatchable generation. And it's our natural gas plants. We do have a couple of facilities that we plan on deploying that utilize natural gas. We need that for reliability so that we can meet the customer load demands during those very critical peak periods where dispatchable resources are needed. A big driver for a lot of our investments in renewable energy comes from the Virginia Clean Economy Act. That legislation was enacted in 2020. So we're about to make our 5th clean energy filing to the Virginia State Corporation Commission in about a month. But it wasn't that state legislation that drove the company to invest in clean energy resources. Prior to the VCA, the company had already committed to net zero carbon by 2045. So even in our modeling, as I mentioned, we work really closely with our strategic planning team. If you remove the requirements of the VCA and you look at what would we build if we weren't mandated by this legislation to build these power generation resources, there's really no significant difference in our build plan in meeting the VCA requirements versus not meeting them. The only key difference is in retirements of fossil fuel generation. The VCA does call for those retirements sooner than what the plan would otherwise economically select them to decommission. But I'm not going to run through all these numbers, but it's a significant amount of megawatts that we plan to deploy in order to meet the requirements of the Virginia Clean Economy Act. And we're well on our way. We've already met the 2024 target. I mentioned our coastal Virginia offshore wind project. It's under construction today. It's going to be operational in 2026. It's pretty amazing. We did install 2 pilot turbines that have been operating since 2020. Each one of those turbines is 6 megawatts. So between the 2, that's sufficient energy to power 3,000 homes. So each wind turbine of these vintage energizes about 1,500 homes. Well, now the technology has evolved that a single turbine is 15 megawatts. It's enough to energize 3,750 homes per turbine. It's a tremendous amount of energy. And I never had an appreciation for how much energy is created by these offshore wind turbines with a fairly high capacity factor. And by capacity factor, that's the percentage of time the facility is operating at its peak output. And the wind turbines produce over 50% capacity factor, so more than half the time they're producing their peak output. Very different than solar. Solar capacity factors in Virginia range between 22 and 25%. The company did announce that we have acquired 2 additional offshore wind leases for potential expansion at some point in the future. And then I noted distributed solar. This is one of my favorite things to work on because we're utilizing land that ordinarily would not have another purpose. We have 2 projects that we are just about to put shovels in the ground. One is the Ivy Landfill Solar Project. It's located in Albemarle County of Virginia, just outside of Charlottesville. It's a former landfill. And on that project, we're going to have 3 1-megawatt solar facilities. So it's a great example of a project that is using a landfill to produce energy. Another good example is a facility called Kings Creek. It's located in York County, Virginia. It's a 20-megawatt brownfield solar project. Kings Creek is a formal federal fuel depot with conditions that do not allow it for any other type of development. So we're able to deploy 20 megawatts worth of energy on York County. And on the peninsula region of our system, it's pretty challenging because we have a lot of load on the peninsula and we have a lot of very critical infrastructure. We have Fort Eustis, we have the Yorktown Naval Weapons Station, we have CIA Camp Perry, we have Langley Air Force Base. So a lot of critical infrastructure on the peninsula, yet no significant power generation. So we import a lot of that energy into that part of our service territory. So to be able to place a 20 megawatt solar facility in a region where there's significant load but no other power generation provides a great deal of resiliency to our system. These projects typically come at a higher cost, but they are critically important, and I'm an advocate of us deploying more and more distributed solar. And then there's energy storage. As I alluded, it enables us to pull energy from the grid when it's not needed and to redeploy it. Some legislation was passed a couple of years ago called the Grid Transformation and Security Act, which enabled us to invest in some systems to procure equipment, to operate them, to use them in different ways. There's pilot projects got approved by the State Corporation Commission. We've deployed those projects. The phase 1 facilities came online in 2022. Very successful, continuing to learn from those systems. The phase 2 systems were in the process of finalizing the development. Should start construction very soon. One that I'll highlight is our Darbytown system. It's a total of 9 megawatts, a 5 megawatt form energy system. 5 megawatt form long-term energy storage system, 4 megawatt EOS system. The form energy system is a new chemistry that gets away from lithium-ion batteries. Lithium-ion is certainly useful for traditional energy storage, but as you may be aware, the mining of lithium typically comes from areas of the world that geopolitically can be challenging. We also compete with every EV manufacturer for that same lithium. So for grid scale energy storage, we really want to pursue technologies that get us away from using lithium. They're also limited to typically about a 4-hour discharge. And we know that sometimes, like during these severe weather events, we may need a battery to last more than 4 hours. So we're looking at new chemistries. The form energy system is the second pilot project using this type of chemistry. It's very similar to rust in reverse. It's an iron-air battery, and it's taking the rusting process but reversing it in order to store that energy. The other system is called EOS. It's a zinc hybrid battery. It has a discharging capability of about 10 hours. And then we have several utility scale energy storage systems in the works. The Dry Bridge energy facility was placed in service in 2023. The Shands energy storage is anticipated to come online in 2025. And then Dulles. Dulles will be the largest energy storage system in our fleet once it's operational. And the key thing about Dulles, it's located in a very high load area. So having the ability to store energy where you have critical infrastructure, you have a significant amount of load, is really important to maintaining the integrity of our system. And now to the main topic, the Dulles Solar Plus Storage Project. And when I was putting these slides together, I went back and said, well, when did we actually start the project? And it was a little confusing because I don't have emails that go back more than a decade. But some of our internal discussions started as early as 2015. And it took us a couple years to get that going. In 2015, solar was pretty new to the company. We hadn't yet deployed any projects at scale in the Commonwealth of Virginia. I had worked on acquiring projects in California and Utah. And in fact, a lot of people in Virginia thought solar, that's kind of a West Coast thing, that's a California thing. It took a couple years before we realized that we need an all of the above approach. We need energy that doesn't rely on fuel, doesn't impact our customers as the cost of that fuel varies. So the fuel is free. And it took us a while to get there, and we have since grown a tremendous fleet. But at the early stages, Dulles was part of that discussion fairly early on as we were looking at deploying more solar in the state. So it took a while to get those discussions. But I believe 2015 is when we initially internally started identifying parts of the Commonwealth we thought may be ideal for the deployment of solar. A lot of effort to get us where we are today, whether through project development, through the NEPA process. We had to get Department of Transportation approval all the way up to Secretary Buttigieg. We had to go through a competitive RFP process to identify a firm to do the procurement and construction of the facility. Certainly worked on the lease for quite some time with the airport authority, especially given the very unique nature of the lease, which I'll get to in a couple of slides. And then once all that was done, once we knew how much the project would cost, we had to then submit it to the Virginia State Corporation Commission for their review and approval. And that's a 6-month process for them to review the application, and they approved it. So now we're in construction, and we're very excited about the facility being operational in 2026. A little more details about the project itself. It's a 100 megawatt project. For the solar side, the energy storage, as I mentioned, is 50 megawatts. We plan on it being in service third quarter of 2026. It sits on about 835 acres. And then for the project, we did what's called in-kind consideration. We followed a model that's similar to what we did with the Navy a few years prior to kind of inking the deal for the Dulles Solar Plus Storage Project. We built a 20 megawatt project at Oceana Naval Base in Virginia Beach. And when we were in discussions with the Navy, they understood it's federal land. And so we're talking about a lease, and if you provide a payment for land that's owned by the federal government, those proceeds would go to the Department of Treasury. And the base is like, well, that's great, but it's kind of like sending money to a black hole. They wanted to see more local benefits to the base. How can they improve the resiliency of their base? So we worked out an arrangement where we provided an alternate feed to the base. We invested in equipment to give them more energy reliability, and in exchange, they provided the land for the solar facility. So we call it in-kind consideration. So in lieu of making a traditional lease payment, we provide some kind of infrastructure at our cost, and we do that in exchange for the use of the land. And it was very successful with the Navy. We kind of redeployed that same model with the Metropolitan Washington Airports Authority. We're well underway today with our construction activities on the solar portion of the project. And once operational, we do plan on it operating for about 35 years. The in-kind consideration allows us to make investments in the airport in the really kind of three main categories. One is the solar carport. There are two 1 megawatt solar carport installations that we plan on constructing. The beauty of the solar carport, one, it's going to provide a great value to the customers that travel through Dulles, a shaded space to park. But more importantly, it will offset energy that the airport would otherwise need to get from the grid. So it's going to reduce their electrical load demands from the electrical system. So it's reducing their need to buy energy long term. And then fleet electrification. We do plan on providing light duty vehicles and all of the associated charging. And then electric transit buses to take passengers. Also a very critical element to help decarbonize the grid and the associated charging with the transit buses themselves. We did have a groundbreaking event a little bit more than a year ago, and I won't reread the quotes from Bob Blue and Jack Potter, but it just goes to show how important this project was to both us and to the airport authority. And we did have the groundbreaking event. It did make international news, got a lot of fantastic press. This will be a facility that millions of folks flying into this region will see as they look out the window, and it'll be a testament to everything that we're doing in this region to decarbonize our everyday. A couple of quick visuals of some of the construction activities. Here you'll see on the left-hand side construction of the substation that's being put in place. And then all of the pilings have been delivered on site, and now they're in the process of driving those pilings for the solar facility. And it's the pilings that really set up the backbone for the racking system of the solar. This facility will have what we call solar trackers. So as the sun moves across the earth, the panels will rotate to maximize the amount of energy that can be absorbed and transmitted to electricity. So it's a very exciting project, very proud to be a part of it. And I have to say there's no other team that has been just amazingly helpful and beneficial to work with than the Metropolitan Washington Airports Authority team. It was a process to get through, a multi-year process, but it's been at all points, at every turn of the road, it's been a partnership. We see this as being mutually beneficial, and we're very proud to be a part of this very significant project that we'll plan to bring to this region. I don't know if we want to open up to questions now or go right into the panel.
We do. We have a few minutes for questions, and I'm sure there's got to be one or two in the audience. So raise your hand if you have a question, and we'll visit some time.
And you can ask me about anything that is related to what I do. So any power generation, Dulles project. I'm not on the wire side of the company, so unfortunately I can't answer any associated transmission distribution questions.
We'll see. I don't know if I need a mic. I may not need a mic. But, fantastic project. Congratulations moving forward. I did take off in an airplane recently and saw the clearing. Things are moving forward. Great. I did have a question about the SMRs.
Yes.
What's your timeline on that? And are you looking geographically at anything in Northern Virginia?
Really good question. This is one of my favorite topics. Being a nuclear engineer, like I've been dreaming about building new nuclear power plants for a couple of decades. So we've been working on potential deployment of small modular reactors for a little bit more than 4 years. Based on information we have today, where those various designs are in the process, given the uncertainty associated with the federal nuclear regulatory licensing and the construction and being first of a kind type project, we think the first facility could be placed in service by the end of 2033. Now there's some federal legislation that just got passed this summer called the Advance Act. Talk about a piece of legislation that had tremendous bipartisan support. I've never seen legislation get passed through the Senate with only 2 nays. So it was near unanimous. It just goes to show the tremendous bipartisan support for new nuclear. And I've been telling people as I talk about this, we're not splitting the aisle, we're splitting the atom. So tremendous support. So that the ADVANCE Act could streamline that licensing process, so maybe you could shave off a year or 2 in that schedule. We have identified the first site at our North Anna nuclear power station. There's an existing operating facility there. There's 2 units. There's an ideal interconnection. We have a source of water. The locality is extremely receptive. The site has been heavily studied. We have all the geotech work done. So North Anna is a very ideal site for the first facility, but we are looking across the Commonwealth. Today, we don't have any sites in the Northern Virginia region that have identified as potential candidate sites. That's not to say at some point in the future we couldn't look at a site somewhere in Northern Virginia.
Thank you.
Okay, we now have a mic. More questions? Is everybody ready to get to the panel? Oh, we do have one. Yes.
Sorry, Todd, my name is Jake Jansen. I'm the energy manager at Dulles Airport. Every time I hear about the solar project, I hear the megawatt capacity. Do they have a projection of how many kilowatt hours the project is expected to generate?
They do, and I don't know that number off the top of my head. I believe the capacity factor is between 22 and 23%, but I'll have to verify. And we could, from that number, you can calculate the anticipated megawatt hours that are generated on an annual basis. So if you shoot me a note, I can get a more precise number for you.
Okay.
Yeah, they do a pretty complex engineering model where for the life of the facility, we anticipate, hey, here's the energy profile for 35 years. And it's based on historical weather patterns, it's based on, so the irradiance gets factored in, tree shading gets factored in, the orientation of the panels gets factored in, your equipment selection gets factored in, and they run this fairly complex model to determine what is the anticipated output of the facility given routine maintenance, and it could be outages you factor in. So we come up with an estimate, we provide that to the commission, and that's factored into the financial model to ensure that the project we're delivering will provide value to our customers.
Thank you, Todd. Any more questions? Yes, Sophie.
I'm Stephanie Brooks with MWAA. Thanks for the presentation. I had a question about the storage. So this project is using lithium storage, from my understanding.
That's correct.
And you mentioned other alternative types of storage that you're looking at. Are those alternatives going to be, do you anticipate them to be capable of executing a project like this in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. So not at Dulles. So we selected a technology for the Dulles project, and you have to do that pretty early on to procure the equipment. We have the toughest safety standards for energy storage projects, and we've been told that many times from all the various energy storage firms. They're like, wait, your standards go beyond our normal specifications. We do that for a reason, because we take safety very seriously. And a lot of that's based on the spacing between the containers that hold the energy storage facility. So the equipment for the Dulles project has been selected. But based on what we learned from the pilot projects, a facility like Form or EOS, and there's others out there, we could certainly deploy a project at the scale of the Dulles project using those alternative chemistries. But we need to pilot, we need to test it, we need to ensure that it can operate as anticipated. We don't want to make an investment of a 50 megawatt scale on a chemistry that's not yet been proven. But it's very exciting. If you look at, you Google, long duration energy storage companies, there's like 100 companies that are in the marketplace today. And some of these companies won't make it and some will. So it's at the very infancy of development, which is pretty typical for any emerging technology.
Okay, time for 1 or 2 more questions. Okay, let's get to the panel discussion. Thank you, Todd. That was excellent. I'd like to now invite our panelists and Todd back up to the stage here. Okay, thank you. Might want to do a mic check. The button is on the very bottom. Maybe hold it for a second or two. No? Ah, good, excellent. Thank you, Bob. Okay, so we have a rock star panel today. We've got returning members who some of you who have attended this event in the past may recognize. I'm going to start with the gentleman next to me, Mr. Anthony Kane. Anthony is President and CEO of the Institute for Sustainable Infrastructure. As President and CEO, Anthony oversees the organization's overall operations and leads the development of the Envision framework for sustainable infrastructure. Anthony was formerly a research director at the Zafnas Program for Sustainable Infrastructure at Harvard University's Graduate School of Design, a research associate with the Materials, Processes, and Systems Group at Harvard University, and an instructor at the Boston Architectural College. He holds a Bachelor of Architecture, summa cum laude from Virginia Tech, go Hokies, and a Master in Design Studies from Harvard University. Welcome, Anthony. Next we have Ms. Michaela Humby. She is the Environmental Manager at Energex Renewables, an independent power producer, IPP, that develops, constructs, owns, and operates renewable energy projects in the U.S. Michaela currently manages environmental due diligence efforts and executes permitting strategies for greenfield and brownfield development of utility-scale solar projects while navigating unique challenges and opportunities within each locality and state. She further supports the company's commitment of environmental stewardship through ecological management and biodiversity conservation. Her specialty areas also include environmental site assessments, risk assessments, and soil groundwater remediation and management. She holds a Bachelor of Science from the University of Tennessee in Environmental and Soil Sciences. Welcome, Michaela. Next we have Robert Lazaro. Robert serves as the Executive Director of the Northern Virginia Regional Commission. The Commission is a consortium of the 13 leading local governments in our region. As Executive Director, Bob leads a staff of 16 accomplished professionals. During his tenure, he has stabilized the Commission's finances, created its first rainy day fund, and invested in personnel and technology to improve the Commission's operations. The Commission provides a wide range of services to its local government and community partners. Bob has a long history of public service in the community, serving first as a town council member of the town of Purcellville and 4 terms as its mayor. Under Bob's leadership, the town placed more land in conservation than any town in Virginia. Thank you for being here, Bob. Next we have Jonathan Matheny. Jonathan serves as the Environmental and Sustainability Manager at the Metropolitan Washington Airports Authority, which operates Washington, D.C.'s commercial airports, Ronald Reagan and Dulles International, along with the Dulles Toll Road. Jonathan is responsible for most environmental programs in the Office of Engineering, as well as implementation of the Airport Authority's Sustainability Plan, which was adopted in September 2020. The Corporate Sustainability Plan focuses on the Airport Authority's ability to impact the environment in a positive way. And lastly, I will not go through Todd's bio. We know Todd now. That was great. Let's give our panel a round of applause. Now, I don't go anywhere without using a navigation app. And I don't moderate a panel without a roadmap. So I've got some questions that I'm going to pose to the group, and we will have time for you to ask questions as well. Now, I'm going to start by using That question I ask of all of you, and we'll start with Anthony. Tell us where you last flew and from which airport, and then what you'd like our audience to know about sustainability.
All right, well, this is a good one for me. I had the pleasure of flying from San Juan Airport in Puerto Rico. I was meeting with the sustainability director there at their airport, so it's a tough life, you know. But I would say, you know, just overall with sustainability, I know we'll talk about it more, is I'm just so excited, especially in the recent years with the passage of the infrastructure bill, the Inflation Reduction Act. Not only the focus on infrastructure, but the focus on sustainable infrastructure has just doubled and tripled in the last few years. And I've been doing this now for about 15 years. So it's exciting. 15 years ago, we were talking to people about why should they care about sustainability and what is sustainability. And now the questions are really how fast can we do it? What are the costs? So it's really exciting to see the evolution. And like Todd was highlighting, the new technologies, the new processes, the new pilots that we're seeing, it's all just changing and evolving so rapidly. And it's a very exciting time.
Thank you. Michaela.
Hi, excuse me. I last flew to Boston from Dulles, so love Dulles. And ultimately, you know, the end goal of sustainability is, you know, environmental protection, conservation, but it's also equally important to think about, you know, that balance between economic growth, social equity, and resource efficiency.
Greenville, South Carolina, via Reagan National to visit Proterra Electric Bus company that is providing the electric buses. The successor company is providing electric buses to MWAA and to others. And sustainability, I take no credit for this, is the intersection of profit, planet, and people. My daughter had our first grandchild 9 days ago, so more important than ever. Not for me, I just waited in the back room. But, you know, for me, whatever we can do to protect this precious place for future generations through the things that we're doing here and the future things is most important. Thank you.
So I, too, last flew from San Juan, out of DCA, but I was on my way to St. Thomas. So, yeah, again, a hard life. So I think sustainability, it's just one of those topics that's near and dear to me as just as an individual, as well as looking at adjacent community, as well as future generations, my kids, and those that I know and love. And I think we have a great responsibility to be good stewards of the environment. And sustainability is really one of those pathways to get there. And I think now, as the rest of the panel has already said, it's a very exciting time to be part of the sustainability cause, as it's become part of a way of life. And we truly have the opportunity to impact our surroundings. So, and it's also a very exciting time to be in aviation. This is one of the times in aviation that has seen more development than any time in the last, I think, 30, 40 years. So new technologies, eVTOL, SAF, hydrogen, electrification, all those new technologies are pretty exciting to be part of. Last week I attended a peer utility conference in Phoenix, Arizona. So I flew from Richmond to Charlotte to Phoenix, where the appreciation for air conditioning was very real. It was about 110 degrees, so it was even though it was in the conference room, it was very warm, and it was great to be in beautiful Arizona. To me, sustainability, you know, in energy, so you marry sustainability and energy, as you're well aware, is critical to our national security, it's critical to the way we live our lives. But you can do that in a sustainable fashion. And the beauty is we continue to innovate. And I think there's kind of an innovation theme that each of us have spoken about. But as you do that innovation, there's some things that we've always done that we're learning to marry with power generation. This morning during breakfast, we were chatting about landscaping. So we deploy sheep at a lot of our solar facilities, which is fantastic. People have always been raising sheep. but now we'll be able to raise sheep and also generate electricity. We installed our first beehive at one of our solar projects a couple weeks ago. So now we're generating electricity and raising bees, which is good for the agricultural industry. So we can continue to innovate in new ways with technologies, using drones for inspections. But as we bring new innovative projects to the grid, we're still doing things we've always done that are important and sustainable, like raising sheep and bringing bees to the picture. So it's just a perfect marriage of doing things better and better and doing things in an environmentally sustainable way.
Thank you. All right, my first question is to you, Bob. NDRC has a robust solar resources section on their website. What would you like to say about what your organization has done to promote renewable energy in the region?
Well, first and foremost, I want to thank Committee for Dulles for doing this breakfast again. I think it's really impactful and important. We have been running what is known as Solarize Nova program for the last 10 years in promoting solar through a bulk purchasing program, and several of our commissioners are here and we're thankful for their support. We've just reached our 1,000th array, 9.2 megawatts of solar, $28 million in private sector investment, which is nice to be able to do, and it's not you have to do this, it's an opportunity. We've seen the price of solar go from $3.70 a watt down to $2.75 this current campaign that we had, and we're using local solar contractors who we have a kid who's interested in installing solar arrays, paying $17 an hour just to start. So it's a real career and a real job. We also provide educational tools. We've created the first solar map in Northern Virginia where you can take any building and see the solar capacity of that. We've created a green roof map for the inner core localities to see the green roof capacity. But I mean, a lot of our local governments are doing, super work. Fairfax is putting 4 megawatts on the landfill. They opened up a garage with green roof and solar. Prince William County is moving forward or looking at doing power purchase agreements. So we see ourselves as a hub of information sharing out to our local governments to inform them of best practices. And I want to just give a shout out to Dominion Energy. I spent more time several years ago talking about LED street lighting than I really would ever care to in my life. Truly, last year, Fairfax County alone saved 14 million kilowatt hours because of the improvements in LED streetlight technology. So if you want full cutoff, dark sky compliant street lighting, you can get it from our partners at Dominion Energy, which is incredibly important. And then the last piece of it is, and not a lot of people talk about, is conservation. It's told to be the fifth wheel of generation. And we work with community housing partners and others to get people involved in, I can't afford a solar array, but I can, and many times are eligible for free programs either from Dominion or from the state or from the federal government to help them reduce their energy load at home. So it's not just about solar, but it's the whole cycle of things.
All right, thank you. Sticking with solar for a little while longer, this is coming at you, Jonathan. So the new project that solar and storage that Todd spoke about, what kind of impact is that having on your sustainability program and your initiatives associated with it?
Well, it's a huge shot in the arm, right? So we start off, we at MWAA have always had a focus on efficiency, right? But in 2020, the development and adoption of the sustainability plan included 6 overarching goals. Of those is reducing emissions through the increase of electrification of our operations. As you can imagine, we have a large extent of operations and just of our infrastructure that enables aircraft to take off. So, and in that plan, we identified 2 or 3 major items that use the most fossil fuels. One of those is the buses. There's one of the bigger fossil fuel emission generators. So as part of this deal, we'll get 18 buses, and that's a reduction of about 129 of carbon emissions, metric tons of carbon emissions per year per bus. You extrapolate that over a 15-year lifespan of average bus. That's a real reduction, right? And those are the results we're after at MWAA. We're also getting 50 electric vehicles and associated charging infrastructure, and then 2 behind-the-meter solar arrays of 1 megawatt each. So that fundamentally changes our position in a relatively short amount of time. So this deal is very creative. It makes real change and sustainability for sustainability. And the IKC infrastructure itself is also meets one of our sustainable overarching goals of sustainable administration. So the way that we approach contracting, the way we procure those types of items, that's a real win for us as well. It falls right in the line of our objectives, our goals, and we're succeeding gaining ground on those goals. So there's real impact from this project. So that's the major things.
So that makes me think about one of the highlights. I think one of the takeaways today is the in-kind consideration in that partnership. What other types of partnerships, similar partnerships, are you looking at, Jonathan, within your program?
Well, so we have standing meetings with our airline partners. We're always looking at ways to work with them in a mutually beneficial way, and air, water, waste, and those types of items. So one of our highlight programs is our green concession programs. That's one where we can help green our full facility where maybe we don't have direct control of the operations. This is a voluntary concession awarding certification where there's 5 different media of efficiency in building that concessions have to meet certain standards. So it's kind of a structure that's similar to maybe LEED or Envision, where you have the different standards. If they meet a certain number of those items, then they will be green concession certified. Like there's a sticker, there's some additional marketing there for them. And this year we had 42 new green concessions awardees. That's in addition to a significant number over the past 2 years. I think 18 the year before, and I think we have upwards to 100 partners now. And that's a real difference, not just in the MWAA footprint, but extending to partnerships with our tenants.
All right, thank you. Okay, this is back to Todd. You mentioned that Northern Virginia has the greatest electrical load growth in the country. And I know you might have talked a little bit about what you're planning to do. Anything else you want to highlight about what Dominion Energy is planning to meet the demands of that growth?
Yeah, we're really taking an all-of-the-above approach with a very diverse portfolio of power generation. We think having that diverse portfolio of power generation is critically important. So if there's any one hiccup in any one technology or power source, you can lean on the other technologies to ensure you have a resilient grid. So as I mentioned, offshore wind, continuing our deployment of solar, both utility scale and distributed energy. We're looking at innovative technologies like no nuclear. We're looking at hydrogen, long duration energy storage, continued use of natural gas where needed for resiliency. So it's really, in my mind, it's an all-of-the-above approach, and we're taking that approach to ensure that we can deliver reliable energy. But at the forefront of our mind is affordability. So the actions we take, we need to make sure we do it in an affordable way so that our customers aren't adversely impacted by the investments we make. So it's affordability, it's increasingly clean and reliable.
So I guess on the topic of increasingly clean energy sources, Michaela, that must mean a lot of opportunity for you and your organization. maybe highlight some of the most important considerations when you're looking at a site for development for renewables and such.
Yeah, I mean, with any large-scale development, you have to you have to consider the, hydrologic sources or resources in the area, the topography, or wildlife, and cultural resources. But honestly, the trickiest thing is making sure that the grid infrastructure is suitable enough for these solar facilities, utility scale solar facilities can actually connect to the grid. And, on the very, very low end, and this is probably an outdated number, but having to install gentiles or transmission lines per mile is, again, at the low end, $1 million per mile. So if you have a perfect piece of property that's flat, has absolutely zero wetlands or streams, no tree clearing, no grading required, that's great. But ultimately, that's that's not the end all be all if it's going to be 20 miles away from the closest interconnection point. Would love it if it was closer though. That would make things a lot easier for me.
I guess that's where your team comes in, Todd, building transmission.
That's right, and really in coordination with PJM. And PJM is the organization that manages the Regional Transmission System, or RTO. So the PJM manages any project connected at transmission voltage, and there's a difference between distribution voltage and transmission voltage. Transmission voltage, typically you see those metal towers with the big lines. Distribution voltage, it's the wooden poles with typically 3 lines if it's 3-phase. So the transmission system is managed by PJM. There's been a tremendous backlog of projects in the system that's created quite a challenge, to the point where you submit an interconnection queue position with PJM, it could take 6 years to go through the study process and get those upgrades installed to connect the project. Traditionally, what PJM had done, every project where there's a queue position submitted, they would analyze it on an individual basis and determine the impact to the system. What upgrades are needed, what's the cost of those upgrades. It's a very detailed engineering study that evaluates the temperature of the line to make sure that the injection of those electrons won't violate any thermal constraints. So analyzing each project on an individual basis with hundreds of projects being filed, they put themselves in a situation that was not achievable, with a multi-year backlog. So they've undergone what they call PJM reform. It had to get approved by FERC, and it has gotten approved by FERC. So now we're in a transition phase where they're transitioning to a new way to analyze grid interconnections. And now they're going to analyze them in batches. So everyone will submit their projects into the process, and they'll evaluate all the projects in the queue at one time. It's really supposed to streamline the process. So we're not there yet. We're still in a transition. But by the end of that transition cycles, we should be able to file projects into the PJM queue, get those studies back, and within 2 years have that project connected to the grid.
All right, great. I want to pivot back to airports because we are the Committee for Dulles. Anthony, last year we touched on the Aero Guide. Your organization published the Aero Guide. I'd like you to maybe talk a little bit about some of the recent achievements with regard to Envision certification, specifically in aviation. Sure.
Thank you. I'd also like to thank the committee. I've had the pleasure of attending this event multiple times now, and it's such a pleasure. And the Institute for Sustainable Infrastructure, we're an international organization, but as a DC resident and a native Northern Virginian, if you count Stafford, I don't know. It's, there's an extra layer of pride when I get to attend these events and talk about home and what we're doing, so thank you for that. Yes, if you're not familiar with ISI, we were created by the American Society of Civil Engineers, the American Public Works Association, and the American Council of Engineering Companies. And the very quick version is they created us to create Envision, a rating system for sustainable infrastructure. And if you're familiar with LEED for buildings, as I'm sure many of you are, we are the lesser known, like a lot of infrastructure sector things, the slightly lesser known equivalent for specifically infrastructure projects. So LEED is for all those human occupied buildings, offices, commercial spaces. Envision is for all of the hard infrastructure. So we work across all different sectors, but I would say about 40% of the Envision use is in transportation, and around 25% of that is specifically airport projects. So 10% overall, we see a lot of activity at airports. As Mike mentioned, last year we released our Aero Guide, which is specifically how to use Envision on airports. And I think that's important because, one, if I were to rank all the different sectors of infrastructure and where they are in their kind of sustainability journeys, airports would rank above at the top. They're very excited. There's a lot going on at airports. They really are the gateways to all of our communities now in this modern era. And they see themselves as sort of the first impression, the first touch that people have, and it's important for them to be sustainable. But they also face some of the most difficult challenges. They are heavily regulated. They're landlords in a sense, right? So they have a lot of control, but they don't have total control over everything that goes on. And then they're heavily regulated in terms of material choices, airside lighting, land use, as we've talked about. So that's why I'm excited about this project, because it seems to use all of those limitations of airports to really create an opportunity and something that's really special and impactful for the community.
All right, thank you. So that leads me to you, Jonathan. Can you tell us about some of the most encouraging developments within MWAA's sustainability efforts over the past year?
Oh yeah, and thank you, Anthony, for mentioning some of those things. It's always nice when somebody else says it, right? Just living in a regulated environment, regulations are part of my life, but when you have those types of constraints, when you get a big win, it feels all the better, okay? And I think, pivoting into that, obviously the Dominion partnership and actually seeing the groundbreaking of this project after so many years of planning was very, very exciting. I can really see forward motion. Again, some of our tenant coordination projects, but even some things that are as simple as liquid collection stations at the security checkpoints at Dulles and Reagan. You wouldn't believe the impact on waste reduction just by something as simple as that. And so I would say, like, probably the most exciting development for me is to see sustainability catch on throughout the organization, and also to see some of our impacts of sustainable administration, some of our contracts, and seeing our new contractors come in and replace things with more sustainable options. We're starting to see that kind of across the board and see that vision actually come into fruition. And so that's really exciting to me, to just see the change in the culture, as well as document some of these wins and see some reductions and some real changes at the airport. So, and it's always exciting to share these types of things as well.
Good. Let's see. Let's take a pause after my next question. If you have questions in the audience, we're doing great on time. So if anybody wants to interject a question to the panel, think about that as I go through my next question. Yeah, jump in.
Sorry, just to add a quick comment to that, because I think it is also important to recognize, unlike a lot of industries, where you might be driven by innovation, right? And we talk about innovation and wanting to be new and cutting edge. Infrastructure is not an innovation-led industry, right? We have a lot of concerns about safety, about reliability. Nobody wants to be the first to do something on an untested thing, and Todd kind of hit on that, right? With the energy supply is too important to risk a major investment on alternative chemistry at that scale, right? And that's not unique, that's across the board, right? So it's a really challenging industry for us to do things different and new and first time, and that's what sustainability is demanding. So I think it's a huge credit for this project to be the first, to be the largest of its scale, this type. It really serves as a model, and it has a transformative effect across our industry. Because once somebody can say, hey, we're not the first, this has been done before, this has been proven, then you have kind of a cascade reaction and a lot of change. So again, I want to just make sure we appreciate how important projects like this are.
I'd like to just chime in briefly, because I just want to follow up with something that you all have said and Todd has said about demand for electricity in Northern Virginia. You know, one factoid, Northern Virginia is 3% of the land mass of Virginia. We generate 42% of the state's GDP. It's $276 billion. If we were a country, and people in Southwest Virginia believe we are our own country, it's the 48th largest economy in the world. We're also home to the highest density of data centers in the world. So there's a correlation between data centers and economy. There's a lot of discussion now about where they go, what they look like, but there's 300 of them and more that are being built today that are here. So how can we take advantage of that opportunity? Something that I'm very proud of at MWRC, many years ago, we worked with Loudon in Arlington on community energy planning. And one of the things we were looking at was district energy, district heating. We just recently had a meeting with Equinix, one of the largest data center operators in the world. They're interested in working with local governments on utilizing the waste heat from these buildings for other uses. We created a map of every data center and every co-located local government facility. You'll be surprised at how many schools are near these data centers. So there's this opportunity to take waste heat and move it to a school to heat it. And so for all the engineers in the world, you need to think about heat transfer, et cetera, because there is this great opportunity in Northern Virginia to take advantage of something that has generated billions in tax dollars. And as a former Loudon resident, my taxes went down every year as more and more of these things went up, and my schools were funded pretty much 100% each year because of the revenue generated by data centers in our community. So keep an eye on that space. Equinix is serious. The swimming pool at the Paris Olympics was heated by waste heat from a data center in Paris. We have a whole bunch of new facilities being built in Northern Virginia that are proximate to these data centers. And so I see a great opportunity to reduce greenhouse gas emissions just by utilizing something that you see as steam, not steam, but just heat in the winter coming off the roof of these buildings.
And district energy, that's not something entirely new? Yeah.
It's not new. I mean, and Scott York, when he was chairman of New York, and a couple others, when we would visit in Germany, they would use waste heat from coal plants to heat communities, literally entire communities. They would use waste heat from garbage plants to heat parks and swimming pools. So it's not new. If you born and bred in New York City has a district energy system, right? Con Ed runs steam through all these buildings. So it's not new. It's, I think, a great, efficient way of taking something that would otherwise go out into the atmosphere, use it for other purposes. So I really think, and I had sent Roger Natsahara, who's not here now, the Vice President of Engineering, a note that, you know, all that land next to the airport is eventually going to be data centers. Gee whiz, couldn't you use that waste heat to heat the runway so you don't have to spend a lot of time in the winter with salt and other materials to clear them? NREL does it in Boulder. They heat their sidewalks in the winter, waste heat from a very small data center so they don't have to shovel. So there's a lot of opportunities out there if we think about it.
You mentioned Equinix. I'm reading a book that really talks about the physical internet, and I'm just now getting into the discussion of the today's data center. You know, the first internet. I mean, the internet was born at UCLA and Stanford, and it was Equinix who really brought it to what it is today in terms of the co-location. So it's good to hear they're already considering applying that technology. I'd like to now invite the audience, if you have a question you want to interject. Yes?
John Platt here with MSL Energy USA. So, national securities, I love how Todd's talking about that, right? You understand where we live, but also globally. So something that you guys haven't touched yet, and I think it's at the forefront. You mentioned microgrid, right? Especially around here with data centers. So a state like Virginia, so we're working with the state of Utah, So Utah is thinking about going microgrid, right? So on a global scale, on a security level, all these military bases that we have, I mean, it's like, we have to be, I mean, obviously these military bases have diesel generators, fuel, transportations. Without fuel, energy, they don't operate. And similar here is, what are the plans and strategy and maybe your thoughts, especially Dominion? Because think about, if we are dependent on just one source of energy, if that goes down, then what happens?
Okay, Todd.
Yeah, we've certainly looked at microgrids for many years. We have a small scale microgrid at our Kitty Hawk facility in North Carolina as a kind of a test bed for how to operate microgrids. We're in discussions with various Department of Defense agencies for the very things that you alluded to, where, during critical events, there could be a need for a federal installation to not be reliant upon their traditional civilian power source to energize those critical national security needs. So in our discussions with military bases, one of the things we talk about is, well, if we site a facility at a military base and use the land, well, that may be an opportunity for us to install a microgrid such that during those periods of time where needed, whether it be a weather event or other type of national security event, we have the ability to essentially put the base on a microgrid and continuing to energize that critical infrastructure. So it's something we've talked about with the various branches of the military. Virginia, we're really lucky in the fact that we have so many federal installations within our footprint across all the branches of the military. So it's something we talked about a lot. I think there's a lot of innovation yet to come with microgrids. Today it's costly, but I think there are things you do even if it comes at an incremental cost, something that we continue to evaluate and pursue.
Just to add on that, we do see it a lot with critical infrastructure. So I mentioned I was just at San Juan Airport, and they're building a small-scale power generation facility on the airport. As you can imagine, when Maria hit, we have sort of risk assessments and priorities when there's a natural disaster, and critical infrastructure is usually at the top. But when there are these really massive events, there they decided, or they learned that the airport is a lifeline for the entire island, and so even a small loss of service is an issue. So I think there's also there's a lot of kind of calculations that have to go into microgrids to see whether they make sense at certain levels. But from a resilience point of view, starting with critical infrastructure and then seeing kind of what can be included in that microgrid, we do see that quite quickly.
And if I could just add, at NBRC we completed a military installation resilience review. It's all online, executive summary, and about 600 pages of backup. And one of the things that we've looked at is electricity resilience for these facilities. Some of them are as simple solutions as changing some switchgear at the Covanta waste energy plant to be able to bring the electricity down to a point where it could be used without having to go through this huge distribution network or through a substation to bring it down to usable use. But I know that at Marine Corps Base Quantico, there is a microgrid that is there. I know just in reading in the papers, Loudon is talking about gas microgrids. And some of as new data centers are approved as perhaps an option, but that's still going through a public process.
I just wanted to note as well that microgrids, decentralized energy, it's all really exciting. There's a lot going on. We all have thoughts. We probably should note that excuse me. This is going to complicate Todd's life a lot, right? I think it's worth noting that most of our energy generation and transmission systems were designed for large centralized. There's a lot of work that has to go on beyond just the creation of the microgrids and putting the solar panels on that the energy providers have to do, and that needs to be funded and factored in as well. So there's a lot of coordination that goes into that.
All right, I think we had one more question from the audience for now.
Hi, Connie Jacobson, supporting energy with temporary housing for your crews. To pivot on the other gentleman's questions, I know DOE has got 7 hydrogen hubs that they're funding. I think Dominion's involved with Appalachian Hydrogen Hub, and as he said, Delta Hydrogen Blending. What other kind of infrastructure support are you seeing coming through, either currently or pending, that we might all be aware of and also possibly support? And what other U.S. trade partners are you seeing to bring forward some of the innovation that's going to help us make reliable decisions with energy infrastructure?
Certainly, you mentioned the hydrogen hubs. Electric vehicle charging infrastructure is another one where you see more and more investments. I think a lot more needs to be done in that area. I don't think we're as far along in installation of fast chargers across the system that we thought we'd be a couple of years ago. So it's been somewhat of what I feel like it's been a slow mover. But EV charging, all kinds of innovation with the transmission system. And as noted, the system was really designed to be kind of the flow of electrons in one direction, from a centralized power station to homes and businesses, and now it's a more dynamic scenario. So a lot of work is being done to really understand ways that we can take advantage of this dynamic nature of the transmission system. So a lot of innovation with how we model how the transmission system is utilized. So I think you'll see tremendous investments made in the transmission system. And then even at the distribution level, things as simple as the meters installed at your homes, and innovation that allows us to detect when you don't have power at your house and do that remotely. So the digital meters at homes that allow us to monitor your system to ensure reliability. Innovation is really across the board, distribution, transmission, and in power generation. Certainly looking at hydrogen. I don't know that in the near future you'll see power stations built exclusively with a fuel source of hydrogen. The round trip efficiency is really low, and it's expensive to invest in the electrolyzers needed to produce the hydrogen, to then turn around and use it to produce steam to turn the turbine. That round trip efficiency is really low, so there needs to be more done. I do think hydrogen is what I would consider the Swiss Army knife of energy. A lot of different applications for hydrogen. I think that one of the smart deployments of hydrogen will be to use it as a fuel source where there are no other options available. So sea transport, for example, you can really decarbonize the way we transport goods across the ocean, maybe using hydrogen. So I think we just need to be creative and think of innovative ways, but certainly the item you noticed is something that we're closely monitoring.
Any other comments on that one from the panel? Anthony?
Well, I would just agree with everything Todd said, and it's interesting there because it hits on the whole supply chain issue. So with some of these technologies, it's easy to say, oh, that's a really interesting technology, but then you have to look at all of the sourcing and all of the steps and the reliability of those. So I know, for example, with a lot of transit agencies, hydrogen buses are a possibility, but most of them seem to be going with electric buses because of the unreliability at the moment of the production and the sourcing of the hydrogen. So I think the investment in the hydrogen hubs is really smart, because also if you're in Southern California, it's a different calculus there. For us, to get large amounts of hydrogen, you have to factor where is it coming from, and the environmental benefits might be lost when we have to ship it halfway across the country. So I think the hubs are a really good improvement, but then kind of as Todd said, there's probably going to be a pecking order of the technologies where it makes the most sense and is the most efficient, and they're going to get the supply first, and probably large scale energies can be further down.
It's challenging because I'll go to these utility conferences and you'll see things in the press and people reach out to me like, why isn't Dominion investing in geothermal power generation? Or why are you not investing in carbon capture and sequestration? Because Southern Company is doing that. They're spending a lot of money on carbon capture. Well, the geology in Virginia is different than the geology where Southern Company operates. So if we were to capture the carbon from a fossil power generation station, we then need to build a pipeline from Greensville, Virginia to Southwest Virginia. And just imagine the permitting and engineering and public concern about a new pipeline from Greensville to Southwest Virginia, because we don't have the geology needed to sequester carbon in the earth like you do in other parts of the country. if you look at geothermal, NREL, or the National Renewable Energy Lab, has mapped out where all of those geothermal resources are, close to the surface. And in Virginia, we don't have geothermal resources close to the surface, so it's not practical today, based on today's technology, to invest in geothermal power generation, where it may be a wise investment in other parts of the country, like in the Northwest.
Good point. We've talked about innovations. We also touched on some of the challenges. I want to start with you, Jonathan, and just have you maybe lay out some of the challenges that you see may arise in future development within your sustainability program.
Yeah, it actually segues pretty well to the conversation that we're having here. Is there are really two things. One is we just are moving forward with a $9 billion useful lease agreement for projects at both Reagan and Dulles over the next 15 years, right? Those build-outs. We're also in that same era looking at finalizing the master plan at Dulles Airport. These are major build-outs in a relatively short period of time. So as part of the master planning process, we're developing electrical master plans for both airports. And that's really the critical infrastructure. How, if we're going to electrify as time goes on, how much energy do we need to power our own facilities, the infrastructure itself, but then what about our airline partners? What about the tenants? What about the list goes, the traveling public, on and on the list goes. So how much energy demand will there be? Do we have the supply, or is our infrastructure sufficient, or do we need to plan for more? And then there's the emerging technologies. We just talked about hydrogen. Hydrogen aircraft is on the forefront as well. How do we get the hydrogen? Is the hydrogen made in a sustainable way, right? Is there a real impact or a true sustainable feature to hydrogen? You have green hydrogen, and then how far are you shipping the hydrogen, right? And by what means? Pipeline? Is it, are you shipping by truck? Is it liquid? Is it on and on the list goes. So the big challenges aren't just buy-in, but they're how do you effectively plan for the future and the demands of technologies that may or may not come to fruition, right? So those are the challenges to try to hit the mark of a moving target, right? So we're planning the best that we can. We have stakeholder groups. We've outlined our existing conditions and trying to forecast what's coming next, and working to address those issues. But those are the major ones, and ultimately, it's centered around energy supply and demand. So.
Okay. Thank you, Jonathan. Todd, you touched on the Virginia Clean Economy Act. I want to give Michaela an opportunity to share some of her concerns about the updates and how they impact permitting and some of the other activities she does.
Well, I'll start off by saying that there has been a significant boom in solar development in Virginia just in the last 4 or 5 years, and with that there are new updates to state regulations. For example, the proposed House Bill 206. Is anybody familiar with that? Yeah.
Too familiar.
Yeah, buckle up. Oh my gosh. So I'll summarize. I'm not going to hit every single point of the proposed regulation, but it's based off of changes for the permit by rule application that is managed by the DEQ. So that is solar permitting, environmental solar permitting for sites under 200 megawatts and over 5 megawatts in Virginia. So that is my sweet spot of what I work on. So the proposed changes include additional review specifically for prime farmland and forested land. Now, as I understand it, we are in day 27 of executive review in the governor's office, but there's been a lot of heated debate over what is considered to be, a reasonable mitigation. And there's been a lot of back and forth with that and further delays. And, having to go back to public comment periods because, everyone on all sides, they're all mad. And, I foresee it still being tricky. I mean, even through the end of the year, it's expected to go back into public comment period by the end of the year, but I foresee it going on far longer than that. I'm sure Todd can agree, and others who are in renewable energy development in Virginia. But it's making it difficult to plan for or incite future projects because now we want to avoid disturbing prime farmland, which developers do anyway, and also contiguous forest land as well. But I mean, at this point, it's putting a pause in citing new projects that aren't already in the interconnection queue. And if you remember Todd mentioning, it's way backed up. So we have time, but it's making it real tricky. But on a local level, as I mentioned with the local boom or the statewide boom in solar development, a lot of localities are starting to update their ordinances for solar development. On one side, we have counties that are placing acreage caps on how much solar development can be developed in the county. There are others that are proposing bans to certain solar technologies, and there are counties that are implementing outright solar bans, no solar at all, which is going to be difficult with the goals of the Clean Economy Act. But on the other side, there are other counties who are embracing the challenge to be, 100% clean energy by 2045, 2050, and, working on the regulations and even working with solar developers in other counties with more established regulations with, as Todd mentioned, implementing pollinator habitats, Virginia Smart Program certified, or Smart Pollinator Program certified by DCR, and requiring a set amount of acreage to be dedicated to pollinator-friendly habitats. And then also other reasonable requests like vegetative screening, setbacks from any main roads, which, when there are really clear solar ordinances in counties, that just makes it a lot easier for the developers and ultimately the community, because the less ambiguity with solar development and the requirements, the better.
Any other comments on that?
I'll just take the opportunity to say that there is no power generation resource that's the silver bullet. It doesn't exist. So every power generation source has its pros and cons, but at the forefront of everything we do is mitigating or eliminating environmental impacts. Sustainability is at the forefront, but even something as carbon-free as solar has its impacts to communities. And we take going through that local conditional use permit process very seriously. I've spent many, many nights at planning commission meetings, board of supervisor meetings, talking about the pros and cons, the benefits to the locality, the jobs we're bringing, the local tax revenue, whether it be through revenue share or property taxes, bringing energy locally, but their impacts. And we mitigate those impacts. We've learned from what we've done. When we first started building utility scale projects, we don't have a perfect track record at stormwater management. We've learned from that. The DEQ is implementing new requirements, and we're going to comply with those. But it's challenging, and it's a learning process, and there's no one energy source that doesn't come without some kind of mitigation that's required or some kind of impact. But for us, community engagement and going through that local use permitting process is critically important, and we don't want to build projects where it's not going to be positively receptive by the locality.
All right, thank you. At this time, I'm going to open up to the audience and invite questions. And I see one again. I'll come around with the mic this time.
Yeah, this might be another question for Todd, the physics graduate or undergraduate anyway. One power generation source that hasn't been mentioned yet is fusion. And is Sam Altman nuts totally? I mean, maybe he is, I don't know. And I'm just curious your take on the future there. Is that going to ramp up very quickly, once the breakthroughs finally happen, or is this going to be decades out of the future?
So I just said there's no silver bullet. Well, I take that back because I think there is a silver bullet, and it might be fusion. there's a lot of research and development going on in fusion, billions of dollars in fusion. The leading company is a company called Commonwealth Fusion Systems outside of Boston, Massachusetts. It's a bunch of really smart MIT guys. Came together and they are leading the pack. We have really made significant advancements in our magnets. These high temperature superconducting magnets are magnitudes of order stronger than previous magnets, and that's allowed us to create the conditions necessary to generate a fusion reaction. So I think it's real, and I think we're a lot closer than we've ever been. When I was in grad school, the joke was, oh, fusion's always 10 years away. And it's always been 10 years away for decades and decades. Well, we are within 10 years. The prototype fusion reactor that CFS is working on is going to be operational in 2026. And I have faith that it's going to be successful given the amount of investment, amount of research, and where we've come in magnet technology. In my career, there have only been a few moments where I've gotten goosebumps, but I went on a tour of the CFS facility about a year ago, and the goosebumps lasted for a day. I do think fusion is real. I think it's coming. And it's a way to produce a significant amount of energy. The energy density of fusion is about 10 times that of the fission reaction, but comes with no daughter products. So when you fuse two light atoms like deuterium and tritium, you create a neutron and a lot of energy in a helium atom. But there are no unstable daughter products that are created. So there's no issues with used nuclear fuel, there's no safety concerns. So I think there's a tremendous opportunity with fusion. The United States is kind of leading the effort, but it is a global effort to do a lot of research in fusion. So stay tuned. And I hope to be on this stage in a couple of years talking about our first fusion facility.
That is exciting. I just wanted to interject. If you're hoping to get your PH, that Q&A session right there is how you get your professional development hour. Thank you. Anthony.
Well, I was just going to add, I'm not in any way a fusion expert or even a scientist, but I would say from the infrastructure side, right, even if we solved the science now, it would probably still be decades before we were able to build and develop large commercial scale reactors that would be supplying large amounts of energy across the country, right? I mean, the timeline for permitting, even the solar project, right? It started in 2015, it'll be operational 2026. These projects take a very long time from concept to construction.
Yeah, I will note that a really important thing happened this summer at the federal government when they passed the Advance Act. I mentioned it earlier. Part of that legislation determined that new fusion facilities would be regulated under 10 CFR Part 30, not 10 CFR Part 50. And those are probably just meaningless to a lot of you, but 10 CFR Part 50 is what regulates our fission nuclear power plants. And we submitted an application to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. That application, if you were to print out all the paper and stack it, it would go up probably 4 or 5 stories. That's under 10 CFR Part 50. Took us 5 to 10 years to go through that regulatory licensing. 10 CFR Part 30 is the regulatory process that a hospital would go through to manage isotopes. 10 CFR Part 30 is what the United States has determined will be the regulatory licensing process for fusion facilities. That application is 30 to 50 pages, not 4 to 5 stories of paper stacked. So from a regulatory perspective, because there's no radioactive nuclides that are daughter products, I think the regulatory process will be much, much shorter than you would for a traditional fission style reactor, which is really promising news that came out of the federal government this summer.
So Vic Angry, Princeton County. I'm probably in politics at a time with the last name of Angry, because I got a lot of people angry at me. Only from the stance of Princeton County, as you know, is a very growing county, and so we've taken on a lot of data centers, but which has lowered our our residential tax base. We've got money into the county, it's all great. But first of all, I want to thank you all, because this has been a very interesting panel, which I love to come every year, because I'm reminded of the scene from Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, where he said, we're going to electrify this whole area. And so we are in a place right now, really in the nation, where power is the key thing. But so Prince William County, one of the interesting things is that we've outgrown ourselves in citizens, and we've overgrown it. So more than data centers is our ability now to build homes. We're probably going to build more homes that are in Prince William County now, just to relieve the overgrowth that we have, because we have a whole lot of other issues with that. So I just kind of wanted to echo what Bob was saying about, the next level of power. Because for me, I don't know who has the worst job. Me as an elected official, or you all as rocket scientists, and all what you have to do, and just talking about this nuclear piece. I have no idea what you just said. But I'm happy you said it, and you feel like it's going to be a solution, because that's where we are. And I'm balancing how we grow and what we do, but I understand that the big issue is really this discussion that we're having now on the next level of, or how do we work out these grids and power and substations and the whole 9 yards. So just wanted to make that comment. Not a question, just a comment, and thank you all for what you just taken us through. So thanks.
Well, thank you for that feedback. And if there's one place I'd rather be than an event like this, is going to an elementary school and talking to young children about energy. It's exciting to see their eyes light up. And we need to invest more in STEM education. And I think that's how we get there. It's with education, educating our fellow neighbors, but more importantly, educating the children that are in school today and getting them to take careers in energy.
Since that wasn't a question, I've got to invite one more question. Last question out there, but thank you, Victor. Yes.
I'm Melissa Sabatine from Jacobs. Thank you. Hi, good morning. Melissa Sabatine from Jacobs. We are big fans, Anthony, of Envision at Jacobs and so are airport clients, so thank you for your leadership. My question for the panel, in particular you, Jonathan, is what do you think the prospects are of opening up Dulles and other Virginia airports for the use of sustainable aviation fuel? We know that it depends a lot on incentives, both state and federal incentives, and regulatory frameworks and distribution pipelines. We don't know, with the election coming up, what the future is of the current federal strategy of the SAF Grand Challenge and the future of the Inflation Reduction Act tax credits, which are going to expire at the end of the year. So be curious to get all of your thoughts on that.
Sure. I guess probably everybody knows, but SAF is sustainable aviation fuel, and it's generally it's not a carbon-free fuel, but it reduces up to 80% of the associated emissions with aircraft, traditional jet, right? And so it's really what they call a drop-in solution, which means it's a fuel as long as it meets the ASTM standard that you can actually put it in the aircraft on 50-50 blend, which is approved at this point, and the aircraft fly off, right? Aviation regulated. So what are the chances of? There's obviously a lot that plays into it. What does the airport do? We do our infrastructure. When do we make the decision? Well, when there's the demand, right? So when the airlines incentivize it, and they say, absolutely, we want this, we want to use it, how do we get it here? So what we as the airport are doing, I'll go back to the master planning process, is analyzing what it would take to get to the facility, what are the footprints, does it require additional infrastructure? And the answers are kind of a wide array, right? So for a fuel to come to the airport, it does have to settle. It has to blend. It has to go through this full fueling process that traditional jet has to go through as well. So if we were to bring it on airport as a alternative fuel, there are a lot of questions like, can it be mixed along the same hydrant line, or would it have to be brought to a single tank and then trucked? So we have to look at those types of operations, right? And all of it's possible, but it depends on what do the airlines want to pay for, and if it is important to them. So I think, I can't speak to the chances of what, I can't say, we're going to have it tomorrow, or we're going to have it in 2 months from now, or a couple of of years. It just depends on that demand. But what I will say is that we are looking at it and understanding what's required, so when it comes, we're ready. Okay?
All right, thank you. If there are any remaining questions, you're welcome to reach out to Scott York. I think we've got your contact information somewhere.
Scott York at committeefordolas.org.
There you have it. Send those to Scott, and he and I can disseminate and hopefully get your questions answered. At this time, I want to give a great round of applause for our keynote. I say it every year, I think. I learned so much by moderating this panel, getting to know these panelists. This particular session today was extraordinary. Todd, thank you. And just to be in the presence of a nuclear physicist, is that, I mean, it just, yeah, first time ever. Great. So I got to turn it over to Scott.